This case is sad and unusual, with there being two seemingly identical bodies found in the same place with the same wounds, but in two completely different time periods. It all starts with the tragic murder of Iris Shepherd. She was married to Mr. Shepherd and had one daughter. Before she could see her daughter grow up, she was sadistically murdered by an unknown person on the 12th of January 2009. Iris Shepherd was on her way home the same route she takes every day. However, today was different because she was followed along the pathway by a murderer.
I was a detective in the Blackborough Police Department. I have worked there for 20 years and solved every case, except the case of Mrs. Iris Shepherd. The murder seemed to be planned and executed with obsessive attention to detail. We speculated the murderer struggled with serious mental health issues and must have been planning a murder for a while. It was not a personal attack on the victim, but rather obsession and fantasy of a murderer. Mrs. Shepherd's body was found in an alley with a single stab wound into a vital organ. This would mean that she would have been left there, struggling alone, bleeding out for a considerable amount of time. The murder did not show any remorse of Mrs. Shepherd, as he knew what he was doing. He knew it would take a long time. He knew she would feel a considerable amount of pain. It was a cruel, unprovoked attack. It was also speculated that the murder targeted a mother. The murderer may have had bad issues with the family.
I worked with Arthur for 31 years. We worked on so many cases together before his wife's murder. I wanted to tell him about the news of his wife because we worked together before and we were friends. I also knew his wife personally through Arthur. I showed up at his door in the morning. I had just come back from the morgue and I saw on his face that, something was up, and when I saw his wife's body, I couldn't believe it. As soon as I walked in, he was just there, nothing on his face.
The forensic team examined the body and performed an autopsy, which was standard procedure for the murder case. The report said that Mrs. Shepherd was stabbed once fatally. This would have left her alive in excruciating pain until she finally bled out. As I mentioned in the interview, this murderer is obsessive and detailed, which is why he left no evidence at the scene. This is why the case was closed, as well as procedure from higher up in other cases that needed our attention. After the case was closed, we received anonymous threats from someone we now believe Mr. Shepherd, complaining about us closing the case. He apparently had started his own detailed investigation into his wife's murder. His whole house was drenched in papers that he thought were relating to the case. In most cases, papers would just be a desperate long shot that Mr. Shepherd thought could probably help with the investigation.
The body was stolen in the night and there was no trace and no evidence left behind. The police speculate that the murderer returned to collect the body, although no evidence was found to support this theory.
After his wife's death, it was clear that his mental state had changed drastically in a bad direction. He had begun to abuse alcohol and fell into a deep depression. His mental state had declined to a considerable extent to which he was not fit to care for his child. He was engrossed with the investigation of his wife's murder and was enraged that the investigators had closed the case. He felt that more could have been done to find the murderer, and that is why he took over the case himself. The case eventually drove him mad.
Would you say that his wife's death drove him to insanity?
No, I wouldn't.
Why is that?
I'd say it was more the lack of justice.
Lindsay was too young to remember her mother. Her father was trying to take care of her after the death of her mother for a while, but he was inconsistent. Sometimes he wouldn't feed her at all. He would completely forget her towards the end. I tried all I could to help my son. I often came to their house with food for both of them. I would try to tidy up, and he would shout at me. I tried to get him to move on from his wife, but he wouldn't have any of it. My poor son was obsessed. I would always try to get him to help, but he would scare people away. So Lindsay had to grow up through all of this, and you can imagine it was terrible for her. I should have gotten her out of there while I still could. She would do whatever she wanted. She would skip school and not even come to her house many nights. Her dad, my son, didn't seem to care as long as she stayed out of the way of the investigation, but I know he loved her deep down. My little boy was so sweet before it all happened. He was so kind and he would do everything for his family. By the end, he wasn't the boy I raised. He was completely different. He was absolutely crazy. He wouldn't talk to me or make eye contact with me, but he was still my son, and I loved him. I didn't know why he did this. His death and the death of Lindsay had me confused and utterly depressed. He was such a loving, caring person, but the death of his wife completely destroyed him. I wish my boy would have accepted help, and maybe none of this would have happened. I still don't believe some of it. I can't imagine him doing some of the things he said he did.
We were just patrolling round, like we do every day. The daughter of Mr. Shepherd phoned into the police station and said her dad was drunk and acting crazy. We were closest to the area, so we went to the origin of the call, their house. When we arrived, the door was open and things were broken inside. It was a complete tip. There were documents about murder cases that this man should not have had. It looked like a full-on investigation with multiple people. While we were searching the house, we heard shouting and screaming in the alley near the house. We ran to their location and found the body of a woman lying in the street.
Yeah, that's right. When we went to the crime scene, I went to check the body. There was a lot of blood, but a single stab wound, which didn't add up. I applied medical attention. I used my medical knowledge to try to stabilise the young girl, but it was too late. She's already passed away. Whilst I was doing this, my partner saw a man with a knife running down the alleyway, so he went to chase him. When he finally caught up with the suspect, it turned out to be Mr. Shepherd, and he was cutting his leg, crying, screaming. Because of the behaviour, we assumed that he was highly under the influences of drugs and alcohol. He didn't fight back when we approached him. When we returned, the body and the blood were gone.
By the time he murdered his daughter, he was showing signs of harmful behavior seen in previous murder cases and also experiencing multiple hallucinations and suffered from severe schizophrenia. This was understandable as his father had also been diagnosed with schizophrenia, but he had died when Arthur was only a baby. His family has a history with mental health issues. After his death, the autopsy showed that he was on medication for schizophrenia and antidepressants. We spoke with his doctor and he had not prescribed any medication, which showed that he was self-medicating. We have multiple sources who confirmed that he also drank heavily and often. By the time that he died, he had been suffering withdrawal symptoms. His mental health had been getting even worse and he was having frequent suicidal thoughts.
He was sent to Orchard Hill Asylum, which is a maximum security prison, to try and improve his mental health and stability. After Mr. Shepherd was sent to prison, he had multiple suicide attempts by using the springs in his bed to cut himself, but finally succeeded when he made a rope out of his bed cover and hung himself. He died on the 20th of January 2011.